Hello and welcome everyone. In this video, we are going to look at XAT 24 difficulty level, cutoffs, and the timelines. I've taken this paper today, and this is my first understanding of this particular paper. Let's have a look at this. Now, your first section was quantitative ability and data interpretation put together. There were about 13 BI-based questions, out of which it was spread across three sets of three questions each, and a couple of sets with two questions each, if you consider set theory as a part of data interpretation. So there were two questions which were from set theory, and there were there was another set of questions where you had to based on the run rates given for particular set of overs, you had to answer about three questions, and there were a couple of more three question set data interpretation sets which were available. The data interpretation set this time did not include too heavy a calculation on the paper, but the data interpretation section in itself was a lengthy read to my mind. There were so many data points which were given to you, but once you are able to figure out what is given to you, you are able to get down to the answers with not too much of difficulty, that I would say. So, like for example, if I talk about the run rate data interpretation, now the run rate data interpretation had nothing for us to look forward to in that entire passage that was written. That was typically nothing but an explanation of how run rate really works. That's all. So if we are used to looking at cricket matches, if we are used to analyzing a bit of in terms of analytical bend of mind in terms of numbers and all of that, there was one inequality mentioned over there that was a trick to my mind played around with to play around with these students and intimidate them, giving them inequality in data interpretation kind of set. So I don't really think there was set where you had to really struggle to calculate a lot. In fact, there was a set which was based on statistics. That also was something that if you would have read the entire thing, understood, and tried to make cases, it was not very difficult to get down to the answers of those questions. But certainly the questions, the data interpretation in itself was lengthy to read. So was the case with quantitative ability questions also. So if I look at some of these time, speed, and distance questions, or if I look at that profit and loss kind of a question, you will find those questions will be typically lengthy to read. But again, if you are able to sustain that reading, it becomes easy for you to solve that particular question. There were about two geometry questions there. AP was one of the set of questions. Number system had three questions on this. Time, speed, and distance had one question. Profit and loss, cubic equations, log. There were all set of questions available. This paper cannot be then termed as a very heavy paper on one particular part of quantitative ability. Let's say I call it arithmetics heavy paper, or I call it geometry heavy paper. I can't really do that because there's a balance across all the modules that they've tried to present on this particular paper. So very, very well balanced paper is what I'll say. In out of these 15 quantitative ability question, I'll say about 3 to 4 questions were sitters that you could have picked up very, very easily, a very regular set of questions. But the other set of questions you will have to read through. So there was this profit and loss question that we are looking at, had some bit of algebra involved over there, where the sum of the two numbers will remain constant, and then you'll have to maximize the product of the numbers and things like that, right? So cubic equation question. Now the question that I'm terming it as a cubic equation question had questions had an extrapolation of the result of cubic equation into a bit of geometry, where they'd asked you to figure out the area of the circles having the radius as the solution of the given cubic equation. So it was interlinked. At the face of it, you might not find it very, very easy, but the moment you write a couple of more steps and you are looking good on that. Similarly, the AP question that was present over there, it was a arithmetic progression with negative common difference. That means your first value was the highest and the last value was the least. Now, if any one of us have not been exposed to those kind of questions during preparation, you might solve the entire set, you might get the common differences negative, and you might feel what is I might have done something wrong. So those kind of questions were present, which they had tried to intentionally make it different from what you come across. I would term this section as moderate to difficult. By no means I'm going to call this section as an easy section. It also adds to the difficulty level in comparison to the last year's paper, where we found a few questions were incorrect and every student was rewarded for those incorrect questions on that paper. I could not come across this year questions which were to my mind incorrect, but I would still term this paper as moderate to difficult paper. And when we look at the previous year's cutoff, we need to understand that last year there were about 3 to 4 incorrect questions on the paper, and we need to be very watchful in terms of what we say about the cutoff for this year in comparison to what it was last year. We'll come to that in a minute. Let's look at the second section. You had VRC section. There was again not too many surprises on the paper. So you had about 3 reading comprehension passages with 3 questions each, and about 2 reading comprehension passages with 2 questions each. So the reading comprehension passages were typically not very lengthy to read in terms of a 500 or a 550 word reading comprehension, but it was around a 250 to 300 odd words on a reading comprehension at best, right? So not very difficult to read. Yes, there were passages which were difficult to read, certainly difficult to read. You are not able to make sense out of that, but out of the 3 questions or the 2 questions present in each of the reading comprehension, you could have attempted one question at least which was not very difficult to answer. But there were another couple of questions which were not very easy to answer on the reading comprehension, which had 3 questions. The reading comprehension, which had 2 questions, also had one of the easy questions, and the other question was slightly more tricky. The poem that was there was not per se a lengthy poem to read. It was a poem that had about 7-8 lines in it, with each of the lines having about 3-4 words, not more than that. And there were 2 questions based on that. If you have not been exposed to poems in your preparation, it will be difficult for you to solve that. Even if you have been exposed to it, the poem was not very easy to interpret to my mind. I believe those 2 set of questions were difficult to crack. There were fill in the blank questions, and these fill in the blank questions were also not easy set of questions. They were confusing options. When you read one of the option, you will realize that okay, this can be the answer, but the moment you move on to the next option and you feel that this can also be the answer. So the fill in the blank questions were not straightforward, were not easy questions to deal with. Now you had a 5 critical reasoning questions. There were questions where 2 of the paragraphs were given to you, and it was asked how is the second paragraph related to the first paragraph. All those kind of questions were there. Again, to my mind, not very easy questions to handle, but with practice you should be able to get about a couple of these critical reasoning questions right, about one of these fill in the blank questions right. Out of these about 12-13 questions present over here, you can get about 6 to 7 questions right out of these 12 to 13 questions. The parajumble, one of the parajumble was easy and the other one was slightly more difficult to do, but again, one of the parajumble questions you could have gotten right. Now sentence correction, again, typically when we speak in English language, we end up making several mistakes while speaking, and we don't even feel like those are errors. So those kind of statements were there which will at the face of it might seem correct, but by the logics of grammar will turn out to be incorrect. So you have to be very, very careful with this sentence correction. Also in sentence correction, they had asked you questions that out of all of these out of all of the presented statements, which of these statements are all correct, or which of the statements are all incorrect. So you have to be very careful while choosing the options. Okay, again, I'm not going to term this section as an easy section. It was moderate to difficult section. A 5 reading comprehensions to be read with about 250 to 300 odd words definitely cannot be an easy paper. Yes, I concede to the fact that the time was available for all of us to attempt good number of questions in this, but still the questions were not very, very easy. The options were very close. Some of these reading comprehensions were not very easy to read and comprehend as well. Right. So the verdict on this particular section to my mind would be moderate to difficult once again. Decision making this time was a very standard paper with about 7 sets and 3 questions per set. Once again, the typical flavor of XAT decision making was present on this paper, where you just can't decipher between the 2 of the options. You will have to wait for the answer key to be released, and what answers will they present is something that we'll have to accept. Now, saying that this can be correct and this might not be correct is always there with us, and we can all debate post the answer key is out. But the options were confusing. Those were lengthy read all across the paper in all three sections. What I would say is anyone who's good at reading faster, understanding levels are good when they're reading at a higher speed, are the set of students who are going to be benefited in this particular paper. Decision making section also was slightly lengthy to read, and hence I'm not going to term this section also as an easy section. But once again, I would want to give credit to the paper setter, that they've presented a paper which really tests the ability of the student, rather than giving way too difficult a paper or way too easy a paper for the students to handle. So there was, for every student, there was something to take from the paper. They would have felt good after writing the paper, because always there were questions that you would have found easier. But if we really wish to score and get through those big calls, then we will have to score really well on this paper, right? So let's move on and let's look at a rough understanding of what the cutoffs can be. Now, this is for BM and HR program of XLRI, the cutoff that I'm talking about. Your quantitative ability section this year should be slightly lower than the last year's cutoff, because last year we had questions which were incorrect. This year, I don't feel that the questions were incorrect on this paper. About 11 to 12 effective score on quantitative ability should fetch you a BM call from XLRI, and for the HR call, this should lie between somewhere about 10, 11. Now, why am I making this statement? Because about 3 to 4 questions I find which were easier. Now, what reduces the difficulty level is that the calculations were not really heavy, but what increases, what counterbalances that particular perspective is that the data interpretation sets were lengthy to read. They were not easy to read or comprehend. So again, to my mind, that does the balancing act in the paper, and about 11 to 12 marks on quantitative ability for BM should be the call, and 10 to 11 on HR should be the call. If you look at the VRC section, about 8 to 9 effective score, somewhere between 8 to 9 effective score should fetch you a BM call, and so is the case with HR as well. In terms of the sectional cutoff being cleared, I'm talking about. Of course, you will have to look at overall cutoff as well. Now, decision making section, again, typical of the XAT nature, about 8 to 9.5 is what I think should be there for BM and HR both. Overall, if I look at it, the BM cutoff should be somewhere between 32 to 33, wherein HR can be at 31 to 32, at about roughly about 95 percentile, 95, 96 percentile overall. We can expect both the calls to be there with us for BM and HR, provided we have clearly sectional cutoff as well. Now, those of you who are looking at 99 percentile, I think anything above 15 on each of the three sections should be closing on to 99 percentile on the section. Overall, I believe about 44 to 45 marks on that paper out of 75 marks should be about a 99 percentile to my mind. So as we move on, we need to look at the timelines, and as and when I'm recording this session, the question paper is already released about a few minutes back, and the candidate response sheet should be declared in about a couple of days time from here on. So I believe about 9th or 10th of January is when we can expect the candidate response sheets to be out. The answer key proposed by XLRI or the XAT conducting body should be out between 15th to 17th of January. These are all estimates based on our historical understanding of the XAT paper. Results should be out between 26th to 28th of January. I think last year, if my memory serves me right, about 27th, 28th was the date on which the results were declared, and I think this year also it should not be any different from that. Interviews should be conducted between February to March, and by April mid we can expect the calls to be rolled out for the students who have finally converted the interviews. So that's about it with this video. Thank you so much.